Yeah, when I was at Nextdoor, one of the things that happened, right, I took the job at Nextdoor 3 weeks before the pandemic. So, it seemed like a genius move because all of a sudden your neighbors became your lifeline. And as I was at Nextdoor and all kinds of things were happening, one of the things that happened is that I was in place like everybody else for a much longer period of time than usual, right? So for many of my jobs, I spent a lot of time on the plane or, taking the subway to work. I remember my neighbor saying, you've lived next door to me for 23 years. This is the longest conversation we've had. So all of a sudden we got connected to our neighbors in a way that really hadn't happened before because we were all in place, right? Not just me, but almost everybody. And so I sort of had this idea of having an event on the street. And what had happened was in New York, because we live in a city with lots of tall buildings, they had designated some streets as closed streets, or really they called them open streets officially, to give people more places to be able to walk socially distanced. And I had noticed that one of my neighbors would just come out with his sort of like camping chair and sit outside. And once he actually set out like a card table, and him and his neighbors had dinner outside, like on the sidewalk. And I sort of had this idea of like, what if we could set a long table down the street and invite our neighbors, the ones we've known and the ones we haven't known, to come together for a meal. So I post it on my own Nextdoor, and I get lots of comments and lots of reactions. So I sort of get a signal that there's an interest in that. And long story short, by this point, I'd actually left Nextdoor, but I posted a small group off of that larger group to find the people who are interested in sort of doing the work. I met 8 neighbors that I didn't know. And with them and a few other people, we basically invited neighbors to lunch on October 16th. We said, we'll bring the tables and the chairs. You bring the friends and the food. We didn't quite know how it was going to work, but we did pay for the table and chair rentals. And 500 neighbors showed up. And it was just this amazingly beautiful Sunday, really glorious because it brought the entire neighborhood together, right? Old, young, the police, the EMTs. We really made a point of inviting everybody in the neighborhood, the whole ecosystem that makes the neighborhood. And we met so many new people. And as people showed up, if they didn't know anybody, you would say like, oh, Nathaniel, can you take Jim at your table and make room? And I think sort of that idea of creating a welcoming environment that was in a public space, which was the street, was really kind of an amazing thing. And it's a simple idea, right? It's a simple idea that anybody can do. I think what's amazing is it's inspired people to do others. Actually, a woman, Dana Jack, just did one in California. We're going to redo ours here in New York and think of other ways that we can build community. I think what we all know is that since the 1960s, there's been really more of a disconnection that's happened in the world. Bob Putnam, the father of the community movement, talks about this a lot. But I think one of the things we learned in the pandemic is how much we needed each other. And I don't just mean on a Zoom call or digitally on a social platform, but in real life, right? So you hear a lot about the loneliness epidemic, the mental health crisis, how people aren't going to go back to work in the way that they used to. That doesn't take away from the fact that we actually need human contact and a way for people of all kinds to feel like there's room and belonging at the table. And I think the thing about the table is it can always get longer.